Arun and Meera Patel were the kind of couple everyone admired. Hardworking, loving parents who built their lives around family. Their children, Asha and Rohan, were bright, full of promise, and adored by neighbors who saw them grow up on a quiet suburban street. But on New Year's Eve, as fireworks lit the night sky, the Patel family's celebration turned into a silent massacre. By morning, all four were dead in their home, their glasses still raised on the table. What at first looked like a tragic accident soon unraveled into one of the most shocking betrayals imaginable, planned not by strangers, but by the very people tied to them by blood. The Patel family's home sat at the corner of a quiet suburban street, its windows glowing warmly against the cold December night. Festive lights wrapped around the porch flickered with each burst of fireworks in the distance, painting the street in shades of red and gold. Inside, the family was gathered for their New Year's Eve tradition, one they had carried on for years. Arun Patel, a man in his late 40s with an easy smile, moved between the kitchen and the dining table, proud of the dishes he had prepared. Meera, his wife, had spent the day decorating with small candles, golden ribbons, and balloons, turning the modest home into a space that felt alive. Their children, Asha and Rohan, were dressed in their finest clothes. The siblings had invited friends over earlier in the evening, but by now, only the four of them remained. It was close to midnight, and anticipation buzzed in the air. The family gathered around the table, glasses filled with champagne for the parents and sparkling juice for the children. They talked about resolutions, dreams, and the year ahead. Arun teased Asha about her plans to leave for college soon, while Meera reminded Rohan to focus more on his studies. Despite the playful scolding, the love in the room was undeniable. It was the kind of night that seemed picture perfect, the kind that neighbors later said they would always remember. At midnight, they raised their glasses in unison. Fireworks erupted outside, their thunder masking the faint sound of a sharp pop from inside the house. To those outside, it was nothing unusual, just another firework in the night sky. After the toast, they lingered in the living room, chatting and laughing, the television replaying celebrations from across the world. No one noticed that the drinks tasted slightly bitter, just faintly off. The food lay untouched on some plates, glasses sat half empty, and the candles flickered until they burned down to stubs. By the time the neighborhood quieted in the early hours of the morning, the Patel home was dark, and the laughter that had filled its walls was gone. The following morning, the silence around the house seemed strange. Usually, Meera was the first to appear outside, sweeping the front steps or greeting neighbors with a smile. The car sat unmoved in the driveway. Curtains were drawn tight, blocking any view inside. Mrs. Hill, the elderly neighbor who lived across the street, walked over with a plate of leftovers from her own celebration. She rang the bell once, then twice. No sound came from within. She knocked lightly, thinking the family might still be asleep after a late night, but unease prickled at her. Hours passed, and still the Patel home remained silent by noon. Another neighbor noticed the back door slightly ajar. That small detail was enough to stir concern. It wasn't like Arun to leave things unsecured, especially overnight. Calls were made, and soon two officers arrived, their patrol car pulling up quietly as neighbors began to gather, whispering among themselves. The officers approached cautiously, their radios crackling. Stepping inside, they were greeted by the lingering smell of burnt-out candles mixed with something heavier, metallic and strange. The living room was still arranged as though the family had simply paused their celebration. Plates of food were left in place, the champagne bottle open but unfinished, and decorations still glittered faintly in the daylight seeping through the curtains. But the sight of the family told another story. Arun and Meera lay slumped on the sofa, their heads tilted unnaturally. Asha and Rohan were collapsed near the table, their bodies still in their festive clothes, as though frozen in time at a first glance. It might have been mistaken for a tragic accident, a case of carbon monoxide poisoning, or a sudden medical emergency. Yet the details were wrong. Their skin was pale, their lips faintly discolored. Small marks near the necks of each one told a quieter, more sinister truth. The officers exchanged a glance, their unease solidifying into certainty. This was no accident. Outside, neighbors waited anxiously as word spread that something terrible had happened inside the Patel home. The joyous energy of the new year had turned into a heavy silence that pressed down over the entire street. The family that had welcomed the year with laughter had not lived to see the first sunrise. It was clear that what had unfolded inside was not a random tragedy, but the beginning of a chilling mystery that would grip everyone who learned of it on the morning of January 1st. The street was unusually quiet, as though the celebrations of the night before had drained all its energy. Most people slept late, their homes dark and still. But in the Patel house, the silence felt different, heavier, unnatural. The curtains stayed drawn, the car sat unmoved in the driveway, and no one appeared outside to greet the day. For a family known to be active and sociable, this absence stood out. The first sign that something was wrong came when Mrs. Hill, the neighbor, knocked again on their front door. She had tried the evening before with no response, and now she stood holding a plate of leftovers, her unease growing. The house did not echo with footsteps. No sound of laughter or voices floated through the walls. Only a suffocating stillness as the day wore on. Other neighbors began to notice small details that didn't make sense. A balloon from the night's decorations had drifted outside and was caught on a bush, but no one stepped out to retrieve it. The back door, barely visible from the street, stood slightly ajar. That was enough to trigger concern. A call was made to the local police, and within the hour, a patrol car pulled up, its flashing lights cutting through the gray morning. Two officers stepped out, their expressions calm but alert, and approached the property. They knocked loudly, called out the family's name, and waited. Nothing. Deciding they had cause to enter, one officer pushed the door open slowly. The air inside was stale, with faint traces of candle smoke and something far less pleasant. The house felt frozen in time. Holiday decorations still hung on the walls, golden ribbons dangling limply, but their cheerful purpose now felt eerie. The dining table was set as though the family had simply stood up and left mid-meal. Plates of food sat half-eaten, glasses filled but untouched, and the television in the living room still glowed faintly with the muted sound of a news broadcast. The officers' eyes fell on the living room, and their steps slowed. What they saw made the festive decorations seem grotesque. The entire family was there, each of them slumped as if sleep had overtaken them suddenly. Arun and Mira sat against the sofa, their bodies twisted at odd angles. Asha lay on the carpet near the coffee table, her head resting against a fallen cushion. Rohan was collapsed just beside her, one of his hands stretched forward as if he had tried to reach something. None of them stirred at the sound of footsteps or the officers' voices. The truth was instantly clear. The initial thought that perhaps the family had been overcome by fumes flickered briefly in the minds of the officers, but the details didn't match. Their lips had a strange discoloration, their skin pale, and there was an unnatural stillness in the way they lay. This wasn't sleep, nor was it an accident. A closer look revealed tiny wounds near the necks of each of them, barely visible but unmistakable. A handprint-shaped bruise marked the youngest boy's skin, suggesting he had fought, if only for a moment. The officers called for backup, their voices low but urgent. Soon the small street filled with police cars, crime scene vans, and hushed neighbors gathering at the edges, straining for glimpses of what was happening inside the once cheerful home. The flashing lights reflected in the windows of nearby houses, a harsh contrast to the decorations that still clung stubbornly to fences and porches. Investigators moved through the house carefully, documenting everything. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass. The Patels' belongings remained untouched. Valuables lay in plain sight, undisturbed, which ruled out robbery as a motive. Whoever had entered the house on New Year's Eve had not come for possessions. They had come for the family. Word spread. The shock in the community deepened. The Patels were well liked, the kind of family people waved to in the mornings or shared meals with during holidays. No one could imagine why anyone would want to harm them. Yet inside their home, the evidence spoke differently. Poison had been slipped into their celebration, a silent weapon that left no chance for survival. But it wasn't flawless. The bruise on Rohan's neck suggested he had noticed too late, tried to resist, and been forced down. That one detail gave investigators their first clue that the crime wasn't as smooth or silent as the killer had intended. Investigators began reconstructing the night with this possibility in mind. Vivek, familiar enough with the family to be welcomed inside, had arrived with the poison already prepared. Perhaps he had masked it in a gift of champagne or offered to pour drinks himself. The Patel family, unsuspecting, had toasted together, their glasses raised in celebration. What they could not have known was that the toast marked the beginning of their end. The toxin slipped into their bodies silently, stealing their strength one by one. Only Rohan, the youngest, had fought back, realizing too late that something was terribly wrong. As detectives followed this theory, more evidence surfaced. Witnesses recalled seeing a woman resembling Mira's sister near the motel where Vivek was staying. Surveillance footage confirmed the visits. Bank transfers traced from her accounts to his were undeniable. Together, these details built a damning case that this was not the work of one bitter cousin, but a partnership fueled by greed and revenge. The weight of the discovery was immense. It shifted the investigation from the possibility of a lone family betrayal to a coordinated conspiracy, one that turned an intimate family celebration into a meticulously planned massacre. Neighbors, still reeling from the loss of the Patels, struggled to comprehend the betrayal. To think that those connected by blood had sat quietly plotting their deaths was almost too much to grasp. Detectives prepared their next steps with care. Both Vivek and Mira's sister were now prime suspects. The evidence of his fingerprint on the glass placed him at the scene, while her financial and communication ties connected her directly to the planning. What had begun as a mystery with no clear direction was now forming into a chilling narrative of betrayal from within. But even as the investigation gained momentum, a darker question lingered in the minds of those working the case. If two family members could plan something so cold, what else had they hidden? The crime had already revealed itself to be deeper than anyone first imagined, and the possibility of more layers still waiting to be uncovered haunted everyone who had stepped inside the Patel home. When police finally moved to make their arrests, the scene unfolded quietly but with decisive precision. Vivek was found at the motel where he had been hiding in plain sight. Officers entered his room and discovered what amounted to a blueprint of the massacre. On the nightstand were bottles of chemicals consistent with the poison found in the Patels' bodies. In the closet, tucked inside a duffel bag, were latex gloves, receipts for their purchase, and a notebook filled with handwritten plans. Each page described steps for avoiding suspicion, from choosing the right poison to the best way of blending in at a celebration. The chilling part was that the notes were not messy drafts, but carefully organized entries, almost like a manual. The crime was not spontaneous. It was rehearsed and refined long before it was carried out. The station, Vivek showed no panic. He answered questions with a calm detachment, as though he had already accepted the outcome. But in his statements, he revealed something investigators were not prepared for. He insisted that he had not acted alone. According to him, Mira's sister had played a key role in orchestrating the murders. He claimed she had supplied the details about the family's habits, convinced him that New Year's Eve would be the perfect night, and promised him a share of the inheritance once the family was gone. Vivek portrayed himself not as the mastermind, but as the hand that carried out a shared plan, detectives approached his confession with caution. It was not uncommon for criminals to drag others into their crimes in desperation, but his words could not be dismissed outright. Phone records, already under scrutiny, showed consistent late-night communication between Vivek and Mira's sister. Financial records confirmed transfers of money to him from her accounts in the weeks leading up to the murders. Surveillance images from the motel captured her visiting him multiple times before the new year. Piece by piece, the evidence supported what Vivek was saying. When confronted, Mira's sister initially denied everything. She claimed she had been framed, that Vivek was twisting the truth to save himself. Yet under pressure, her story faltered. Investigators uncovered inconsistencies in her timeline. She could not explain the payments, nor could she account for her visits to the motel. What sealed her involvement was a hidden document uncovered on her personal computer, a draft of legal papers related to the disputed property, prepared in advance, naming her as the sole beneficiary. It was created just days before the murders, long before she could have legally gained control of anything. To detectives, it was proof that she had expected the Patels' deaths and was already preparing to seize what she believed was hers. The case against the two conspirators grew overwhelming. Vivek's physical presence at the crime scene was undeniable. His fingerprints, the poison, the notebook of plans, and his stay at the motel near the Patel home formed a chain that could not be broken. For the sister, the motive was clear and the paper trail devastating. Together, they had transformed a family dispute into a calculated plot to erase an entire household. When the trial began, the details stunned the public. The courtroom filled daily, with reporters documenting every revelation. Prosecutors presented the story as one of greed, betrayal, and cold-blooded planning. They described how a holiday meant for joy and renewal had been turned into a night of terror by those bound to the family by blood. The defense tried to shift blame back and forth, with Vivek insisting he was manipulated and the sister insisting she was framed. But the evidence cut through their denials. The jury was shown photographs of the Patel home as it was discovered, the half-eaten food, the untouched glasses, and the bodies in their festive clothes. They were shown the notebook of plans, the bank transfers, the hidden property draft. Each piece painted a picture too vivid to ignore. The verdict was swift. Both were found guilty of multiple counts of murder and conspiracy. The judge, in his final statement, described their actions as one of the most callous betrayals imaginable, sentencing them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the community, the sentence brought some measure of closure, but the horror of what had happened lingered. The story of the Patel family spread far beyond their neighborhood. News outlets carried the tale, labeling it a tragedy that revealed how greed could twist bonds of kinship into something monstrous. People spoke of how no one had suspected anything on that bright New Year's Eve, how the family had welcomed someone they trusted, never knowing it would be their last act of kindness. For neighbors, the memory of that night remained sharp. The sound they thought was just another firework now haunted them, the echo of a moment when life inside the Patel home ended. Each year when the holiday returned, the glow of festive lights carried a shadow, a reminder that behind closed doors, even the happiest celebrations could hide unthinkable danger. The house itself was eventually emptied, its windows boarded, but it stood as a silent marker of what had taken place. Children passing by whispered its story, and adults avoided looking too long at the place where joy had been stolen so mercilessly. The case became more than a local crime. It turned into a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder that trust can be weaponized, and that betrayal often comes not from strangers, but from within the family circle. The Patel tragedy etched itself into memory, its details retold year after year, a haunting warning wrapped in the glow of New Year's lights. It was no longer just the story of a family killed, but of how two people, blinded by resentment and greed, destroyed not only lives, but an entire community's sense of safety. Outside, the neighbors whispered about what they had seen and heard the night before. Fireworks had been loud, covering almost every sound, but one or two remembered hearing a noise that hadn't fit, a sharp crack that seemed out of place. They had dismissed it, assuming it was part of the celebrations. Now, with the grim discovery inside the house, they weren't so sure. The scene that had once been a warm gathering place was sealed off with yellow tape. Officers carried out evidence bags, photographers captured every angle, and the coroner's van waited solemnly outside. What had started as a joyful New Year's Eve had ended in a tragedy that would haunt the entire community. Inside the Patel home lay a puzzle no one yet understood. Someone had walked into their celebration, shared their food and drink, and turned the night into their last. Whoever had done this had vanished without a trace. Leaving only questions that demanded answers, detectives began their work with grim determination, moving carefully through each room of the Patel home, taking photographs, bagging glasses, and dusting surfaces for prints. The house told a strange story. There were no signs of a break-in, no overturned furniture, and no missing valuables. Every expensive item remained in its place, from Mira's jewelry box in the bedroom to the electronics in the living room. The neatness of the scene unsettled investigators because it suggested the family had welcomed whoever entered that night. It was not the work of a stranger forcing their way in, but someone who had been trusted enough to share the celebration. The medical examiner's preliminary findings revealed that the family had been poisoned. A rare toxin, slipped into the drinks, had acted quickly, paralyzing and then silencing them. But something about the youngest child's body unsettled the examiner. Rohan bore a bruise on his neck, faint but clear, that hinted he had realized too late what was happening. Perhaps he had tasted the bitterness and resisted, or perhaps he had simply seen his parents fall and panicked. Whatever the reason, he had struggled, and that resistance was the first thread suggesting the crime had not gone exactly to plan. Investigators looked closely at the table and found fingerprints on the glasses. Most belonged to family members, but one did not match. It was partial, faint, but promising. The discovery of an unknown print inside a house that showed no forced entry raised suspicions immediately. The killer had sat among them, drinking and eating, blending into their family's final celebration. That idea cast a shadow over every potential lead, because it meant this was not the act of a random predator, but of someone with a reason to be there. Detectives began pulling apart the Patel family's history. Arun's finances drew quick attention. He had recently lost a large sum of money in a failed investment deal, one that involved questionable partners. Rumors spread that a man connected to the deal had threatened him, demanding repayment. This possible motive seemed compelling, yet it didn't align with the evidence. A hired criminal might have broken in or used violence. But poisoning drinks at a family gathering suggested patience and familiarity. Attention then shifted to Mira. Weeks earlier, she had been embroiled in a bitter dispute with her sister over inherited property. Court documents revealed an ugly battle in which accusations and threats had been exchanged. To those who knew them, it had seemed like typical family drama, but the timing now looked suspicious. Detectives considered whether the sister could have harbored enough resentment to go this far. Meanwhile, Asha's personal life offered another unsettling lead. Friends admitted she had spoken about someone following her, a figure who seemed obsessed and had been seen near her school. Police traced her messages and social media accounts, looking for any clues. If someone had been stalking her, could they have targeted the whole family? The idea was chilling, but again, the method didn't quite match. Poisoning an entire family required careful planning, not impulsive obsession. For each possibility, contradictions emerged. The failed business partner, the angry sister, the unknown stalker. All were viable, yet none explained the eerie calm of the crime scene. Nothing was stolen, No chaos marked the home, and everything pointed to a killer who had been comfortable sitting with the family as the night unfolded. The detectives began to consider that the crime might not have a single motive but a tangled web of them. Someone with a personal grudge could have exploited the family's vulnerabilities to gain access. Someone who knew their habits, who could pour drinks without suspicion, who could sit close enough to toast the new year as they swallowed their final sips. The fingerprint on the glass became their anchor. If they could find a match, it would cut through the confusion. They sent it through databases, awaiting results, while continuing to interview friends, relatives, and associates. Neighbors described seeing nothing unusual except for the faint pop they had mistaken for a firework. Others recalled spotting unfamiliar figures in the area during the days leading up to New Year's Eve, but no details were precise enough to give certainty. As the days passed, the weight of the tragedy grew heavier. News spread quickly, and the Patel family's story gripped the community. Media outlets painted the picture of a perfect family destroyed in one night, while police quietly pieced together the darker truths hidden beneath that image. Arun's debts, Mira's feud, Asha's secrets, and even Rohan's innocence all became parts of a grim puzzle. The investigators knew that somewhere within those threads lay the reason for the massacre, but the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that this was not the work of an outsider stumbling into opportunity. This was the act of someone the Patels had trusted, someone who had planned the night to appear ordinary until the poison did its work. The silence of the house the following morning, the undisturbed belongings, and the untouched food all reinforced the same haunting idea. The killer had been inside, raising a glass with them, watching as the clock struck midnight, and waiting as the family unknowingly celebrated their final moments. Detectives pressed forward, piecing together fragments of evidence that seemed scattered and contradictory. The fingerprint found on one of the champagne glasses became their strongest lead, and when the match finally came back, it revealed a name that sent ripples through the investigation. It belonged to a man named Vivek, a cousin of Arun Patel. He was not someone the neighbors remembered seeing in recent years, but his history with the family was far from clean. Records showed that Vivek had been involved in multiple financial disputes, failed businesses, and even minor criminal activity. Years earlier, he had asked Arun for financial help, a loan that was never given. The rejection had fueled resentment, and though he had kept his distance publicly, the bitterness had not faded. Investigators discovered that Vivek had checked into a rundown motel not far from the Patel home just days before New Year's Eve. Surveillance cameras from nearby shops placed him in the neighborhood, lingering near the Patel residence more than once. It was not chance. He had been watching them, planning, waiting for the night when their guard would be down. That night had been their New Year's Eve celebration, when food and drink flowed easily. When the family welcomed company without suspicion, the more detectives dug into his background, the darker the picture became. Vivek was not only resentful over old financial issues, but there was also an inheritance dispute. When their family's property was divided years earlier, Mira had inherited a share that Vivek had believed should rightfully be his. It was another blow to his pride and another reason for his hatred to fester. The timing of his sudden reappearance in town was no coincidence. He had chosen this moment carefully, yet something still did not add up. If revenge over money was the sole motive, why kill the entire family? Why not confront Arun alone or target the person who had denied him? Poisoning them all suggested something more layered, something colder and far more calculated. Detectives began considering the possibility that Vivek had not acted entirely on his own. Digging deeper, investigators turned their attention to Mira's strained relationship with her sister. The two women had been locked in a bitter feud over property ownership, one that had led to court hearings and screaming matches. The feud was common knowledge, but until now, no one thought it could spiral into violence. When detectives looked closer, they discovered irregularities in her financial records. Payments had been made to accounts linked to Vivek. Phone records showed late-night calls in the weeks leading up to New Year's Eve. Though the two publicly insisted they were estranged, this revelation painted a chilling picture. The inheritance dispute, once thought to be between Mira and her sister alone, had become a possible motive for conspiracy. If the sister had secretly collaborated with Vivek, the massacre could have been orchestrated not just out of resentment, but also for gain. By eliminating Mira and her family, she would stand to claim property and wealth without opposition. Vivek, in turn, would get his share through promises made in secret.